recent shooting of former President Donald Trump at a rally in Butler, Pennsylvania has shocked America and the world and drawn immediate comparisons with other assassination attempts on US presidents that resulted in presidents being either injured or killed, most notably that of President John F. Kennedy in 1963. However, viewers may be surprised to learn that in the past 50 years alone, both sitting and former US presidents have, including the recent attack on Trump, been the subject of 4 assassination attempts using firearms, where shots in most cases have actually been fired, in addition to multiple plots using other devices that were foiled before any attempt was actually made. In this video, we look at attempts where firearms were used to try to kill the targeted individual, and it will become clear that on several occasions, presidents have come as close or even closer to death than Donald Trump did on the 13th of July 2024, highlighting that the office of the President of the United States remains a very dangerous job. I have selected 50 years, as that is within my own lifetime, and of course we could go all the way back to the very beginning of the Republic, concerning successful and unsuccessful assassination plots. But moving back 50 years brings us to 1974, and the resignation of President Richard Nixon following the Watergate scandal. Nixon was replaced by his vice president, Gerald R. Ford, a president hardly anyone ever discusses, though interestingly he was the only president never to have been elected to the position, only completing instead Nixon's last 3 years of his second term in office. He did, however, stand for election in 1976, but was narrowly defeated by Jimmy Carter. However, Ford is interesting, as that he was the subject of not 1, but 2 assassination attempts using firearms that both occurred within a short period in 1975. On the 5th of September 1975, President Ford was in Sacramento, California, walking towards the California state capitol for a meeting with Governor Jerry Brown. He was working the considerable crowd as he walked towards the building's entrance, shaking hands and speaking to bystanders. But among the crowd was someone with homicidal intent. Lynette Fromm, nicknamed Squeaky, was a follower of cult leader Charles Manson, whose group had infamously murdered Hollywood star Sharon Tate and 8 other people in Los Angeles in 1969. Fromm had been with Manson from the very beginning, and had a leadership role in the so-called Manson family. She had a criminal record as well, having served 90 days in jail for interfering with a witness to the Tate murder. In 1975, she was living in San Francisco with another Manson family member. Fromm apparently wanted to confront President Ford about environmental pollution. On the 5th of September 1975, President Ford was due to make a speech at the Capitol to help win over voters for his forthcoming 1976 bid for the presidency. Learning of Ford's visit, an ex-convict, Thomas Abert, had phoned the United States Secret Service and threatened to kill the president over his environmental policies, and this character was arrested on the 18th of August. However, Fromm believed that California's giant coastal redwood trees were in danger due to smog from cars, and she went to San Francisco to speak with a local government official there about the issue. Returning to Sacramento, she discovered Ford would be staying at the Senator Hotel, only half a mile from her apartment. Fromm decided to kill the president to frighten the so-called polluters into action. Fromm obtained a gun from Manson associate Zeke Borrow, telling him that she needed it to protect herself and her female roommate from enemies of Charles Manson. Borrow gave her a very old Colt M1911 pistol, actually manufactured in 1911 and sold as government surplus in 1913. She also gave Fromm 25 rounds of Colt 45 ammunition, and instructed her on how to load the magazine and how to cock the hammer and pull the trigger, but not, interestingly, how to rack the slide to actually place a round into the chamber. On the 5th of September, Fromm, dressed in bright red clothing, the Colt pistol strapped to her left leg using a leg holster, placed herself halfway down Lincoln Street and waited as the president walked towards the state capitol. As he approached, the president noticed Fromm by the color of her dress, and it looked as though she wanted to speak to him. From was of course one of many people jostling to greet the president. Reaching for her pistol, From raised the 1911 at Ford, the president suddenly realizing that instead of a hand being extended towards him, the hand was holding a weapon. There was, according to bystanders, an audible metallic click as she pulled the trigger and the hammer went down on an empty chamber, before Secret Service agent Larry Berndorf grabbed the pistol, pulling it out of From's hand and forcing her to the ground as other Secret Service agents piled in. Ford continued on to the Capitol and continued with his day's business. From was indicted for attempting to assassinate the president. The pistol, of course, hadn't fired, much to From's surprise, because though she had cocked the hammer back, she hadn't racked the slide, and there was no live round in the chamber, only 4 live rounds in the magazine. If From had been better acquainted with firearms, she most probably would have successfully shot President Ford in his lower abdomen, hips, or legs, as she was holding the weapon fairly low. From was found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. Interestingly, From's pistol was donated to President Ford and is now on display at the Gerald Ford Presidential Museum. Squeaky From was released from prison in 2009, 2 years and 8 months after President Ford's death. From is currently 75 years old. Before the end of the month of September 1975, President Ford would suffer another assassination attempt, and a second attempt made by a woman. This time, Ford was in San Francisco, speaking on the afternoon of the 22nd of September to the World Affairs Council at the St. Francis Hotel in Union Square. Leaving the building at 3:30 p.m., Ford was walking towards his armored limousine and stopped to wave to a large crowd gathered across the street. 40 feet from the president, amongst that crowd, was Sarah Jane Moore, who was an FBI informant. Following the famous kidnapping of heiress Patty Hearst by the Symbionese Liberation Army in 1974, Hearst's fabulously wealthy father, Randolph Hearst, had founded an organization called People in Need, or PIN, to help feed the poor in the city. He did this because of criticism he received from his daughter's kidnappers, who had accused him of, quote, crimes against the poor, end quote. Moore, a former Women's Army Corps soldier and accountant, was a volunteer bookkeeper for PIN and was also an FBI informant, keeping an eye on PIN for the government. Moore had already come to the attention of the Secret Service in 1975 concerning her possession of a .44 caliber revolver and 113 rounds of ammunition. Though some kind of misdemeanor charge had been leveled at her, the Secret Service did not think Moore posed any threat to the U.S. president. However, Moore had decided to kill President Ford, and on the morning of the 22nd of September, she had quickly purchased a new pistol, a .38 caliber revolver. However, she didn't know at the time that the weapon's sights were off, meaning that whatever she aimed at, her bullets would go wide. As President Ford turned and waved to the crowd before heading to his car, Moore, in the crowd 40 feet away, raised the pistol and fired, the bullet missing Ford's head by only 5 inches, passing through the top of the doorway that he had just emerged from. In the confusion that followed, Moore aimed again, but was tackled by former U.S. Marine Oliver Sipple, who grabbed her arm that was holding the gun, which he fired at the same time, the bullet hitting a taxi driver in the groin as he stood outside the St. Francis Hotel. Captain Timothy Hetrick of the San Francisco Police Department managed to get the gun away from Moore, who was subdued as Secret Service agents bundled President Ford into his limousine, which sped off for the airport. During her subsequent trial, Moore's reason for trying to assassinate the president was announced as her attempt to start a revolution in America. She was sentenced to life imprisonment and was eventually released on the 31st of December 2007. She is currently 94 years old. It is a fair assumption to state that had Moore's gun sights been properly aligned, she most probably would have hit Ford in the head with her first shot. The most serious assassination attempt on a sitting president occurred 6 years later, on the 30th of March 1981. Ronald Reagan had assumed the presidency in January 1981, following his election victory over Jimmy Carter in 1980. On the 30th of March, Reagan had spoken at the Washington Hilton Hotel, considered one of the safest venues in Washington, D.C. and in the wider United States for presidential addresses. Reagan had left his armored limousine at 1:45 p.m., walking down the so-called President's Walk at the hotel, a specially protected part of the building that was constructed following the assassination of John F. Kennedy in 1963. He waved to some spectators and film crews as he walked by. The only time Reagan was actually exposed to potential danger from the public was the short 30-feet section between the car door and the entrance to the President's Walk, and he was of course being protected by Secret Service agents and was also surrounded by staff members and police officers. Hanging around outside the hotel was a person with murder in mind, John Hinckley, Jr. Hinckley was a disturbed individual with an unhealthy fixation on actress Jodie Foster ever since he had watched Martin Scorsese's 1976 film Taxi Driver. Hinckley came from a very privileged background, his father being founder and chairman of Vanderbilt Energy Corporation, an oil company. A university dropout, Hinckley had tried to be a songwriter in LA but had failed, becoming interested in firearms in the late 1970s. A disturbed individual, Hinckley was on antidepressants and tranquilizers to control his mood. The film Taxi Driver concerns the protagonist Travis Bickle, a disturbed Vietnam War veteran, who plots to assassinate a U.S. presidential candidate in New York City. He also tries to save a trafficked child sex worker played by Jodie Foster. Hinckley was infatuated by Foster and began a campaign of bombarding her with letters, and after entering Yale University, used the money his parents had sent him to finance his physical stalking of the actress. Unable to physically meet Foster, Hinckley decided instead to do something to impress her. This, he decided, would be to either hijack an airliner or to do something terminal to himself in front of her. However, his plan then changed into killing the president, at that time Jimmy Carter. Hinckley was a serious threat. In 1980, he followed Carter about all over the U.S. during his presidential campaign against Reagan, and Hinckley was always armed. In fact, at one point, he got to within 20 feet of President Carter at a rally in Dayton, Ohio. When Carter was in Nashville, Tennessee on the 9th of October 1980, Hinckley was arrested by police at the airport when he tried to board a flight to New York with 3 unloaded handguns and a pair of handcuffs in his luggage. His weapons were confiscated by the police, but he was freed after paying a $50 fine. Flying to Dallas, Hinckley purchased a second-hand .22 caliber Rome RG-14 revolver and some other weapons before his parents managed to have him placed into psychiatric treatment for 4 months. In the meantime, Hinckley's attention changed from Carter to the new president, Ronald Reagan. Hinckley arrived by bus in Washington, D.C. on the 29th of March 1981, the day before his assassination attempt. He wrote a final letter to Jodie Foster and then took a taxi to the Hilton Hotel. He was armed with the Rome RG-14 revolver, which was loaded with 6 .22 caliber bullets. Joining the crowd waiting on the street, when President Reagan emerged at 2:27 p.m., Hinckley pulled out his revolver and emptied all 6 rounds in the general direction of the president. The first round seriously wounded Reagan's press secretary James Brady. The second hit police officer Thomas Delante. The third bullet missed, but the fourth hit Secret Service agent Timothy McCarthy, who was shielding Reagan at the time. The fifth struck a section of armored glass on the presidential limousine, breaking it, while the sixth struck the limousine itself, ricocheting off to strike the president in the chest. Reagan was badly wounded. He suffered a broken rib and a punctured lung, and serious internal bleeding. As Hinckley finished firing, a Labour Union official in the crowd hit Hinckley hard in the head and dragged him to the pavement, followed by a Secret Service agent and another Union official, and Hinckley was hit several times, drawing blood. The president was rushed to hospital and underwent emergency surgery. Press Secretary Brady was left paralyzed in a wheelchair for the rest of his life following his wounding. Hinckley was found not guilty on all counts against him by reason of insanity. He was sent to a secure psychiatric hospital. He was released under controversial circumstances on the 10th of September 2016, but under very strict terms, and is currently 69 years old. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe and share, and also visit my audiobook channel, War Stories with Mark Felton. You can also help to support both of my channels at PayPal and Patreon. Details in the description box below.